there's actually Andrew Basevich, retired colonel,
Yes.
Principled conservative, and others are saying what's needed in the face of the international terrorism that we're really facing is police action, which is what you're talking about. So let me describe what we, at least in Dorchester, think this is going to look like if it's going to work. And then I can talk about organizing elsewhere in the international network that we're forming. So what we did in Dorchester was to help form a Boston coalition to fund our communities, cut military spending 25%, most ungainly name in the world. It's led and driven by organizations of color. Boston Workers Alliance, which is basically unemployed workers in Roxbury and Dorchester. City Life Vita Urbana, which represents people whose homes have been foreclosed, bank tenants, and on and on and on, about 24 groups in all, which is holding rallies for jobs at public transit stations, which got the mayor of Boston to sign on to this campaign, which sent a letter to other mayors in Massachusetts, got the mayor of Worcester on, now the mayor of Fall River, so like all, not the most prosperous communities in the state. What we think needs to happen if this is going to work is a long-term effort to kind of get outside the skin of the peace movement and go find the people who need the jobs and need the services the most. Go to people who are fighting library closings. Go to people who are fighting teachers being laid off. Go to people whose programs are being taken away, whether they're poverty programs or elderly programs, youth programs, youth workers, wherever people are the most over the barrel, those are the people that historically have led social change movements in this country and who are likeliest to stay with it to the end because there's no other way their needs are going to be satisfied. And because they have to, because their families and their communities need this to happen. And start working with them. Start showing up for their events. Start, without expecting anything in return. Getting to know their leaders and trust them. Sort of, getting to know people on a personal level. This took us several years in Dorchester, and it's far from over. We're just scratching the surface of what we could be doing. But it's basically deciding that we aren't going to be the ones framing this issue. Not alone. This is going to be a justice issue. It's going to be an economic issue. And there's a lot of consensus in the peace movement that we need to kind of move into economic justice issues and into coalition work because the war is no longer the front burner issue that it was in 2006 and 2008. Politicians are not, running and being elected or not elected on their stance on the war. The wars are off the front burner. The economic crisis pushed them off the front burner, and that's likely to be the case for a while. If the peace movement wants to be a political force, if we're interested in power and results, we need to change our approach. And the biggest example of this, to me the most telling, is that Military Families Speak Out, a great organization, just had a national convention decide that they wanted to work on the 25% campaign. MFSO is an organization that does not move beyond where its members want it to move. They've been very careful not to take ideological positions or kind of anti-war positions that go beyond what military families want. And they've been very focused on the needs of military families and their enlisted family members overseas. If they're making this issue, that's kind of the deepest expression I can find of this strategic shift. So really what it means is learning new ways of organizing or recovering old habits that we've let lapse, and sort of spending time outside our own organizations. Not everyone's going to be able to do it. People can play different roles, but it's about building relationships with leaders, members, organizations that aren't in the peace movement over time by showing that we're there for them. So that's what we're doing, what we have been doing, and what we started, the kind of coalition that we've helped start in Dorchester. And our hope is that basically people take it over and run with it, and we help staff it and support it because, you know, we're a mostly middle-class organization and we have resources and time and skills that they don't. So it's appropriate for us to be a little bit on the back burner and for them to be out in the lead, defining the issue, figuring out what the targets are, and doing what most needs to be done, which is move it outside the peace movement, which they can do better than we can. So from there, there's also a regional 25% campaign started more or less simultaneously, which is organizing in not so working class towns like Arlington and Newton, and working on issues of school closings and so forth, which are severe there too. And on October 3rd, the day after the big march in Washington, we took advantage of that to pull together organizations across the country and of different sorts to form a national network to support this kind of organizing, which doesn't have a name yet. The idea was not simply to coordinate a campaign happening here and a campaign happening there, but to coordinate different kinds of organizations. So let's take the think tanks, the research institutes, the lobbying outfits, the peace groups, the grassroots racial and economic justice groups, the unions. All of them have something to contribute to this campaign that the others need. So let's find a way to pull all those contributions together, make them mesh, and give people in Bethlehem or Dorchester the tools that they need to be effective, like effective messaging. You know, we're convening a working group to look at what is our vision of a peace economy. You know, let's do deep framing. Let's talk about what we really want, what our vision is, you know, where the defense plans fit, where the security arguments fit, and that's obviously a work over time. We're not going to come up with the answer right away. It's going to be trying it out and cycling it constantly through the people that are doing the organizing, the base organizations. We've got a working group for assembling materials that people need who are organizing on the ground. We've got one for coming up with effective actions. I'll tell you a couple of the first ones. And we've got one working on basically strategies that'll work on the local level over time. And we'll probably have more working groups. There were about 40, 50 people in the room from 32 different organizations. It was a remarkable meeting. There was like no left backbiting. People were listening to each other. They were very practical, they were very constructive, and people wanted to work. And the same is true of the coordinating committee that got formed out of that. So what we've got is the beginnings of what we need if we're going to take lots of local efforts and make them effective at the national level. So just to mention those two actions. First, a national campaign of local resolutions. You know, get city councils, unions, churches, religious congregations, any organization you belong to pass a resolution saying, you know, move the money, cut military spending, put it where we need it, and don't try to do it the fastest way possible. Stretch it out, hold hearings, make it as public a campaign as possible, involve as many allies in the process as possible. You know, start again by going to the people whose, you know, jobs and services are being cut, get them into the campaign, partly because we need to build relationships and, you know, working relationships with them anyway, and partly because, well, let me give you an example. Our peace group and others in his district had been talking to our Congressman Mike Capuano for a year or two about cutting military spending. He wouldn't give us the time of day. Capuano can be extraordinarily dismissive. When we went to him with community organizations, base organizations, the people in the Boston Coalition, he listened, and he started to move. So, you know, you put together a broad enough coalition, you're going to be able to have a political impact that we haven't been able to have before.